This is my kid's favorite family photo, and it is not mine, as you can probably guess. I am not a roller coaster person, but I'm using this just as a representation for a time about 2 years ago when I was really not having fun. And it felt like quite an emotional roller coaster. So I was doing what I thought was my dream job, what I always wanted. I was VP of engineering at GitHub. I was managing a 500-person team working on amazing tooling for developers. And that was super inspiring and made me really happy. But I was working in a work environment that did not make me happy. Started to feel like my job was extremely political and extremely bureaucratic. And that was not great. So I was not having fun. So like so many before me, that was a moment when I started seriously considering leaving tech for good, walking away entirely. But then I saw something different, and this was exciting. These are my friends, the amazing EngFlow team. EngFlow is a startup doing remote build and test execution. They're a lot bigger today, this is a recent photo, than they were 2 years ago. But 2 years ago, they came to Denver, where I live. They did a company meetup, and I offered for them to do a hackathon in my basement. So this small team, it was around 8 people, came and did a hackathon in my basement. Remember, this is at a time when I was not having fun. And I saw their energy, and I saw their excitement, and I saw them kicking off into this journey of startup that was just so inspiring. And when seeing that, that was the kick that I needed to say, look, one life to live, I'm not having a good time, this is what I want to try. So they really kicked me off into quitting my job and jumping in full-time into the world of startups. Okay, so as you probably realize, this talk is about developer productivity for startups. And the origin story for this talk is really what I just told you, how the startup world has given me new energy, new enthusiasm, how it prevented me from walking away from tech entirely, which is something I really thought I was at the point of doing. It's been a new, exciting journey, and I'm really excited to talk to you all about how productivity from my lens has been very different at startups than it has been in big tech. So the audience for this talk is really anyone who is working at a startup, considering working at a startup, considering founding a startup, but also just anyone who's interested in developer productivity in general. And I will definitely leave time for questions at the end. Okay, so I want to give you a little bit more of my background just to frame where I'm coming from. So a zillion years ago, I worked in a startup when I was in college. That's fine. And then I moved to video games. I worked at Ubisoft for 6 years. I eventually became a tech lead there, which I was really happy about. But that was a grind. And I went into management consulting for a little bit, technical management consulting, learned a ton about strategy. But then in 2008, I had the good fortune to start working at Google. I worked at Google for over 11 years. That's where I knew Jen. I started as an IC, but quickly became a manager and then became a manager of managers. In that time, in my portfolio of teams, I had the great honor and pleasure of working with Google's famous engineering productivity research team. I see Emerson Murphy-Hill in the back, who's an amazing researcher from that team for many, many years, who I got the honor of working closely with. That team was just doing really cutting-edge research into productivity, looking both at system metrics along with qualitative research to really triangulate and understand the developer experience and make meaningful improvement. While I was still at Google, Dora, the DevOps research and assessment company, was acquired by Google, and the phenomenal Nicole Forsgren came to work for me, which she taught me so much more about developer productivity as well. So this has been really an area that I've been very, very focused on. In 2019, I left Google to join GitHub and become a VP of engineering at GitHub. I started with a 100-person team, which grew over time to a 500-person team, very motivating. And then I stopped having fun. That's around the time when the EngFlow folks came and did the hackathon in my basement. I started doing startup advising, got more and more interested in the startup world, and finally had the courage to quit my big tech job and join an amazing, fast-growing startup called Sanity, where I run the engineering team. All right. So my claim with this talk is that productivity, developer productivity for startups is substantially different than it is in big tech. But I do need to start by saying that many things continue to be true. These well-researched, research-backed, science-based frameworks like DORA, SPACE, and DevX are still excellent and still apply in every context. If you don't know what any of these are, you can look them up. There's a lot of research about them. They are flexible frameworks that can make sense for any sized organization. I also can't help recommending this phenomenal book, Accelerate, from Nicole Forsgren, Jez Humble, and Jean Kim, the originators of the DORA metrics. And many of you in this room likely have read this already. If you haven't, it's a really nice primer to understanding sort of the science and research behind productivity and how drivers of your work can lead to improved outcomes. All right. This graph is probably pretty intuitive. The data comes from a company called DX that does research into developer productivity, building on the DORA framework and so on. I think it's probably no surprise to anyone that as your company gets bigger, your eng efficiency does tend to go down. What I like, though, in looking at this graph is you can see the huge variance at the start of the graph in terms of when you're a really small company size, there's a lot of variance in how much your eng efficiency, how good your eng efficiency can be. And so in this talk, I want to talk about how do we get to be on the winning side of this trend. I think there's a really big opportunity to be extremely efficient when you're in a startup. Okay. So as I said, I learned a lot about developer productivity throughout my career, throughout my years in big tech, and there's many things that I think are still very valid lessons that I learned there today. But in the over 2 years that I've now spent collaborating very closely with startups, I do have a different perspective. And startups differ from big tech in ways that you really have different trade-offs to make. So I'm going to go through 5 things today. I'm going to talk about urgency. I'm going to talk about structuring teams and organizations. I'm going to talk about metrics, planning, and finally, experimentation. For each of these sections, I'll give you my point of view on what I've learned, and then I'll also try to give you a real example from my work that puts them into perspective. I also want to give a quick disclaimer. I'm going to talk about a lot of productivity tools today, and I wanted to say that I'm not affiliated with any of them. With a small exception, I am an advisor for Graphite, the code review tool, and I will mention them briefly. But other than that, all the developer tools I'm going to talk about, I'm just talking about because they have been good for me and I'm not affiliated in any way. All right, so let's start by talking about urgency. This is going to be a common thread throughout my talk. Everything you do in a startup is geared towards urgency. And I want to explain this a little bit more. Startups are unproven businesses. They need to fight to survive to become proven businesses. And momentum really matters. I took this data from CapIQ, and this shows for some companies that you should recognize the path from 1 million to 100 million ARR. ARR is annualized recurring revenue, and it's a pretty good measure of startup success. So in the startup journey, if you lose momentum on that journey, you're going to struggle to survive because you're going to struggle to get funding. Sanity could be profitable today if we didn't do any marketing, but that's not the position you're in a startup. You're unknown, you need to get the word out, you need to grow. And so if ever you falter on this curve, you're going to stop being able to get funding. Of course, it is always possible some startups pursue the route of profitability, but that is a very slow road when you're unknown and you're starting from nothing. And in this market, with the number of startups that are out there, the amount of competition, the route to profitability and going slowly means you're very likely to be overcome by your competition. So I hope this framing helps you understand how important urgency is. If you falter on this curve, you may still be able to get VC funding, but it's going to be at worse and worse rates, and your path forward is going to get harder and harder. So urgency is absolutely paramount. That means that the trade-off decisions that you make in startups are very different from established companies that have footholds in the market. You need to lean hard into shipping product value, lean hard into acquiring new customers, and be ready to react to the market, to technology shifts, even sometimes to specific customers. For fun, I added one more data point on this slide, which is OpenAI over the far side. They shot up to over 100 million ARR, of course, but they're burning so much money that is also not a path that is realistic for most of us. All right, so how do you think about urgency? My belief is that in a startup, you need to build a culture that leans into urgency. And so I'm going to talk about 4 cultural aspects to build urgency within your startup. The first is effective decision-making. I have seen poor decision-making being the #1 factor that hurts productivity. You always want to have an open, clear road in front of your developers where they know where to go, they know what they're working on. As soon as people start spinning, as soon as a decision is unclear, that's a disaster. You need to set up your organization to escalate quickly, to find where people are spinning, to have the right decisions being made. Next is healthy risk taking. There's a different risk threshold for startups, as I've started saying. And so you need to build that appropriately within your organization. I like to lean a lot on the concept of two-way and one-way doors that was popularized by Jeff Bezos. So a two-way door is a decision that you can make and come back from quite easily. An example would be, are you going to be building a prototype? Yeah, you can do that, and there's no big risk to that. A one-way door, something like making a breaking API change, is a decision that once you've made, you're kind of stuck with it. So think about that different framework of one-way and two-way doors and really lean into moving quickly and accepting risk. You need to be able to move forward without always having perfect clarity. And in the startup context, as much as I've been a data person for a lot of my life, I do like leaning on data, but I don't need to overdo it. Intuition sometimes is good enough. Ambition and accountability. We really need to emphasize that everyone in a startup is an owner, and we do what needs to be done. You need to have a see something, say something, do something culture, where everyone feels empowered to stand up, to take action, and get things done. I never, ever want to see a situation where I have a postmortem and someone raises their hand and said, yeah, I saw that coming. In a startup, that's completely unacceptable. Everyone needs to step up. And finally, focus and simplicity. So you need to avoid doing too many things at once, context switching. Don't go ahead and build too much until you've validated your hypothesis with your customer base. And always, always look for the simplest solution that will achieve the goal, be that in terms of implementation or in terms of user experience. So now, 2 of these cultural items, I would say, are very similar in big tech and in the startup world, and 2 are quite different. Any thoughts on which ones are different? Don't know. Speaking with. I would say decision-making and focus and simplicity are quite similar between startups and big tech, because where I've worked at Google and at GitHub, I had to put in place processes to make sure that the right decisions were happening at the right level. The ones that I would call out as different are ambition and accountability and healthy risk-taking. Healthy risk-taking in particular is extremely different because the threshold is just so different. I'm going to give you an example from my life. So last year, we did a major update to Sanity UI. This was a change that affected thousands of files, a very visual update, affected libraries that were used throughout our plugin ecosystem. So basically what this means is Sanity has a lot of open source developers who are working in a plugin ecosystem, and we couldn't perfectly know what the impact of rolling out this change would be. People have done all sorts of crazy customizations to their Sanity Studio. The Sanity Studio is a React app that is basically on the client side. This change was ready to launch 2 days before the Christmas holiday, right? All my big tech instincts told me, you wait until after the winter holiday and release then. But the right answer in the startup context with urgency was actually something quite different. We weren't reckless. You never want to be reckless. We felt the change was ready. We made a fallback version such that anyone who ran into trouble would have a fallback. We also knew at the time, Sanity Studio required an action on the side of customers to upgrade. And so we knew that our largest enterprise customers were probably not going to be upgrading their studio 2 days before the winter holiday. But we also knew that winter holiday is a typical time where a lot of developers have some free time, kick the tires on new products. And so we wanted those developers to have the better, more modern experience rather than missing out on that when we were so close to having it ready. So we went for it. It wasn't perfect. Some people did need to use the fallback, but we made this decision intentionally. And then what I did with my team was I did a retro with the team that was responsible, but then also shared that as a case study with all of engineering to say, look, this was stressful for some people. We weren't sure. However, we did it. Here's what we saw. Overall, the team agreed, yes, we got this into the hands of people sooner. That was the right call. Using this as a case study within my engineering organization was a mechanism for getting everyone aligned with this culture and understanding the type of risk that we want to take. Again, not reckless, but definitely leaning forward. I added this slide last night because suddenly I realized, oh my gosh, my talk is so much about urgency that I didn't want anyone to take away from this, that you should be working crazy hours, that you should be burning people out, that you should have no work-life balance. I really want to emphasize that is clearly not the way, and the research backs that up. We do not want people working crazy hours. That will, definitely affect your productivity negatively. You'll lose people, your lower morale, etc. I hope everyone in this room understands that this is not what I'm advocating for. Now, we do push sometimes. Sometimes we'll push a little bit extra to get something out the door, but we will also emphasize that vacation and healthy work-life balance has to be the norm. So everything I'm talking about today is about being smart and intentional about how we work. Okay, next thing I'm going to talk about teams and orgs. Not surprisingly, the way I think about teams and orgs is geared towards urgency and delivering product value quickly. There's a spectrum on how you set up teams and orgs, and so not every big tech company does it the same way, and not every startup does it the same way, but I'll talk about some generalizations. Okay, so the first one I'll talk about is team size. When I worked at Google and at GitHub, which was increasingly influenced by Microsoft, there was this concept of span of control that always came up. Span of control means, on average, how many reports per manager. And often in big tech, if that number was less than 7, you were asked to take some action to remedy that. I don't care at all about that in the startup world. I'll just build teams that make sense. I have some teams that are only 2 people, and they're extremely effective, and they're working really quickly. And you know what? I'm caring a lot less about single points of failure when I'm building fast to get something out the door. I also have teams that are 11 people because they're doing something more substantial, and that makes sense. I'm just going to pick the team size based on the need and not worry about any sort of metrics or numbers around that. Next is roles and responsibilities. So typically what I've seen in big tech is you have very clear roles for different people, and typically there's job ladders that even go along with that. So are you a front-end engineer? Are you a back-end engineer? Are you a data engineer? Are you an eng-prod developer? Are you a designer? And these are sort of very fixed roles with clear expectations. However, in a startup, we just want to be flexible. It's all about getting done what needs to be done. Someone can step up and be a feature lead for something one day and go back to being an IC the next day. I have phenomenal developers on my team who have strong design backgrounds who've put on the UI design hat for a while and just got that done, and that's fine. There's no need to reorg a team to support that. There's no need to change a manager to support that. You just go for it. Ownership. This one's really interesting because I've talked to a lot of different startups about this. So, the ideal in big tech, which I know is never perfect, is that you have stricter system ownership. So you have a service catalog, everyone understands where the responsibility lies for every service in there and so on. Again, it's never perfect, but that's the ideal that you're seeking. Whereas in a startup, you have a lot of flexibility, things are changing a lot, and spending effort on maintaining clear system ownership is often not the right trade-off to make. I've talked to engineering leaders at startups who are like, ooh, I want to do this big initiative where we map out everything and we get clear ownership. It's like, it's just going to change later. You really need to have this accountability and ownership and sort of ambition culture where people are just going to step up and do what needs to be done. Sure, some teams might clearly own some services, but as things move around, we just need to have that accountability of everyone being ready to step up. And it's probably not a good investment of effort to spend a lot of time on the bureaucracy of sorting this all out. Managers in big tech tend to be a lot more people focused. A lot more of their job is on career development. It's been very common for me in many, many years of big tech to give someone a task that I'm not sure that they're going to be able to complete as a challenge, as a stretch, to let them try and see what they can do. Managers in startups are completely focused on execution and getting done what needs to be done. So you're never going to give someone a task that you're not sure they're going to complete. You're going to give it to the person who can hit the ground running. That affects hiring in a startup. We're hiring typically a lot more senior for people who can really hit the ground running. There's a lot less of focus on performance management and career development. One of my favorite things about startups is this idea of, in big tech, I see so much local optimization. Local optimization for what my career path is, local optimization for what my team is doing, perhaps at the expense of other teams. Maybe I'm fighting for headcount. I don't want that team to get headcount because then my team won't get headcount, et cetera. Whereas the best thing about startups, my absolute favorite thing, is that everyone is in the same boat, rowing in the same direction on this journey together, and it's so exciting to be globally optimizing. So everyone in the startup is focused on the overall company success versus these sort of local optimization decisions. Now, I do want to call out that doesn't mean that you're not having huge career development within a startup. I feel like the opportunity to grow, because you can jump into so many different things, you can wear different hats, you can sort of expand what you're learning, is still there, but it's just that the management and development focus is quite different. Just for fun, I'll give you a quick look at my team. There's some things I want to call out in terms of how I've structured this, which I think is effective. So I'm not sure if you can tell by this, but it's a flat organization. All the principal engineers and eng managers report directly to me, and I have no interest in adding a middle management layer. I'm going to keep it as flat like this for as long as I possibly can. I've pulled out the principal engineers outside of the teams, and that is key for decision making. So they act as overall architects. They help resolve difficult technical questions across teams, and they're an escalation point for anyone on teams to help resolve questions quickly. Like I said, my team sizes vary hugely, so the app teams are often only 2 people, whereas, for instance, platform services is, I think, 11 people at this time. So there's no sort of balance in terms of how that goes, and that's perfectly fine. All right, next I'm going to talk about metrics. So urgency means that you likely won't invest heavily in your developer tooling when you start out. You're going to get something that works, and you're going to be focused on getting product out the door. That's what needs to happen. When you're in that state, you have a small team, probably it's pretty easy to spot where your biggest challenges are, where your biggest opportunities for improvement are. I've seen a pattern as startups get a lot bigger, where there is a culture where people are just reaching for new tools all the time and like, oh, let's try this and we'll add this and we'll add this. And there's not a lot of standardization and consistency, and that can become a problem. So as an example, at Sanity, at one point we counted and there were like 4 different ways to do deployment. We were using GitHub Actions, Terraform, Argo CD, and Circle CI. And at a certain point, that just gets messy. It's hard for people on board. As your company grows, investing more in standardization is going to make a lot of sense. The barrier to entry for people will just become too high. So Sanity is now 70 engineers and growing. This is real metrics. From us, we recently invested in the DX tool for understanding and measuring our developer productivity. DX is a great tool in that it integrates easily with your system metrics from all different sources, and it also has a very well-researched survey that I really enjoy. There are many tools out there that you can use for this. I'm not advocating for this one over any other. You can also roll your own, but I do think at a certain point, engineers cost money, and these tools probably cost less than an engineer, so it's definitely worth it to invest. I would say, note, can you tell in October when we went on a company offsite to Spain and very little work got done? You can see that dip. But you can also see in our number of builds that we've started to work on standardization and pulling more builds into our standard CI. So that's a very nice thing to see. This is the Developer Experience Index from DX. I'm just going to touch on it briefly because I really like the research behind it. I chose DX partly because the approach used by this company aligns so well with the work I did prior at Google and GitHub in measuring developer productivity. This work carries forward from the DORA DevOps research and assessment work. Nicole Forsgren is an advisor to this company. That's my only affiliation, just a friendship. And it makes measuring these drivers of productivity on the left there very easy via survey. And the research shows that these drivers on the left influence the outcomes that you want to see on the right. So you can start applying any of this yourself without specialized tooling, but the tooling definitely does make it easy. However, in the startup context, you want to keep it simple. So I'm really into this DX Core 4 for understanding how we're doing in the context of my startup. And the key here, as you hopefully all know, is not to index on any one of these metrics in isolation. That would be a problem. For instance, if you started focusing on average diffs per developer, you could do really terrible things. And that one in particular, I will call out. You're not looking at the individual basis, you're looking at the average. However, you want to look at this holistically. Right now, you probably won't be surprised to hear that Sanity my company, is well over the 75th percentile on both speed and impact. And that's what I want to see for a startup. I've been talking so much about urgency that probably shouldn't be surprising. But we have room, it's been uncovered, to do better in effectiveness. It's like a little bit like talking about how we have 4 different ways to build and deploy. That's something that we're going to work on. So now, having these metrics, I never want to see a slowdown in speed and impact until I suppose we're much, much bigger. But I do want to invest thoughtfully and carefully in effectiveness in a way that's not undermining these other strengths of ours. Okay, now I'm going to talk about planning, and this is really planning geared towards a sense of urgency and focus. Honestly, if you take away one thing from this talk, I'm going to tell you that when you're in a startup, doing a top-down roadmap is a game changer. In big tech, you need to do bottom-up planning. So many people, so many teams. It's really important that teams take control of what their roadmap is going to be. And I'm sure many of us have learned over the years that accountability is associated with productivity. So this may feel uncomfortable to some people to think, wait a minute, top-down roadmap, what is this? I cannot overemphasize how effective it is to do top-down planning centrally with your founders, with your core leadership team. They're probably the people who understand the market and your customers the best and can make a really coherent strategy that's then going to line up to your marketing pitch, to what you want to speak to customers. Very, very effective way to work. When I started at Sanity, we had a goal of building autonomous teams and pretty quickly threw that out the window and moved to this model, and it has been honestly night and day. Again, like I said, you might feel uncomfortable because you might have learned that autonomy is really important for productivity. But I will say that there's still autonomy in this model. Teams figure out how to implement in order to meet the goals that we've set. I will also say that there's nothing like a sense of impact and progress for productivity. And so getting folks to work on the right stuff that lands well with customers is so empowering and so exciting that impact really supports productivity as well. I don't expect you to be able to read this, by the way, but I thought it would be fun to say. We used Miro for putting together a little roadmap, and it's not comprehensive. There is stuff that comes on to the team that's not in this, but this is the big rocks, the things that we absolutely want to land. It's focused and it's in priority order. Okay. Also from the planning perspective, I'm a huge fan of 6-week cycles. This is a Basecamp model. Basecamp has really popularized this. And almost every startup I'm involved in now is doing some form of 6-week cycles. 6 weeks is enough time to land an interesting increment of product value, but it's not so long that you can't reason about it, you can't think about it. Almost any feature that we want to get completed has some implementation that can be done in 6 weeks. We're using linear for project management. We switched to linear about a year and a half ago, and again, a great game changer, really excellent tool. And so the way we do this is that each team has a small set of cycle goals. Each of those cycle goals becomes a linear project. Then there's really nice Slack integration where everyone updates their linear project once a week, and those updates are streamed to a single Slack channel, so anyone in the company can follow along in how we're doing on all our 6-week cycles. This is how Sanity's been doing in our 6-week cycles. So we started on February 1st, which was the start of our fiscal year. And we got off to a really good start, really landing a ton of value. Then over the summer, we started to dip. And I recognize that as a shaping issue, and I'll talk about that in a second. Then once we recognized that issue, we got back on track. So what is shaping? Again, I'll take from the Basecamp resources to talk about shaping. So basically, when you have a goal, and you're at the start of the process, you don't know exactly what it's going to take to implement and achieve that goal. So that's what we talk about as the uphill. In the uphill, you might need to do some experimentation with different UI designs. You might need to do some technical prototyping. You might need to consider what your tech stack is. There's a lot of unknowns that are unclear. But when you get to the top of the hill, then you're at a point where you know how you're going to achieve the goal. And it's just a matter of execution going on the downhill. And so this is something now that we talk about in engineering a lot. When we create goals, we call out, are they shaping goals or are they execution goals? We typically try to have shaping goals done before the beginning of a new cycle so that we can focus on execution. And this has really been a game changer of having that mindset and understanding it. I will give you, again, an example from Sanity. We use this tool, Hylia, on some teams. This is a real-life example of one of our products, Sanity Create. It's an AI product, surprisingly. And before really understanding this concept of shaping, there were just a lot of different tasks that would go into a cycle goal. And sometimes it wasn't clear how well they were understood at the beginning of the cycle. We had sometimes one-way doors being gone through too early before reaching the sort of top of the hill. So now using this tool, we can be very intentional about pulling things in the right order across the hill, getting them done, and that has been a real change for productivity. So this concept of 6-week cycles, along with the top-down roadmap, highly recommend for productivity. Okay, and experimentation. If your startup is going well, then it's constantly changing. There's no point at all spending tons of time on a fancy org structure, on team charters, on deep service catalogs, et cetera, if they won't last. One of my most common phrases at work is life is an experiment. The experiment mindset helps you move very quickly. So for instance, when I rolled out 6-week cycles, the idea made some of the engineers on my team nervous because it was a change. But I framed it as an experiment. We're going to try this. We're going to see how it goes. We're not married to it. And after going through the summer, we came to a point where we did retros and we said, yep, this is working. Let's keep it up. Same thing when we pulled in DX. You don't have to perfectly understand everything or map everything out before you start an experiment, which can allow you to move quickly. Also give a quick note on risk mitigation when it comes to experimentation. So it's often a great idea to try simple things to address a problem before going for the big re-architecture. I know many of our instincts as engineers is often to think about the exciting new re-architecture, but it almost never makes sense in the startup context to go away for a year, not shipping product value on a certain team to come back and land something new. That's just not the way. An example I can give you from Sanity is we started having some limits with our Elasticsearch implementation. There's something called attribute limits with the number of fields you can have in a file. And some of our customers started hitting that and we thought, oh, is this a crisis? But it turns out we found a simple solution where we didn't need to index deeply into nested fields. We could make a configurable limit to how deep you nested, and then the problem went away. Whereas the instinct of some of our engineers, of course, was to throw out Elasticsearch and do the massive re-architecture. It's not like we're not going to do that eventually. I know that we will. But we're taking stepping stones along the way to make sure that we're always unlocking value. I'm going to give you one more example of experimentation, and this is one that highlights how it's particularly different from big tech. So the Sanity Studio team I mentioned before, it's a React app, highly customizable. They worked on a feature over the summer that touched many, many files and was quite a substantial change from the UX of the product. And they worked in a way that I've learned is the right way to work in big tech. So lots of small PRs, merging frequently, and keeping features behind a feature flag before releasing them. But then what happened was we decided that this wasn't the right approach. This wasn't something we wanted to do. And then in our main branch, we had tons of cruft across many, many files. And that was a discouraging job where the developers had to come in and pull out all of that work that they had done. Not fun. So now this team is doing another project. In fact, it released today. Very exciting. Called Releases. It's kind of like Git for content. Anyway, with this feature, the team said to me, we don't want to do what we did before. This is a risky feature. There's a lot of different change. We're going to experiment on a lot of different UI approaches and UX approaches. So we want to work in a long-lived branch. They worked in a long-lived branch. They kept that branch constantly synced to main. So they weren't deviating from main otherwise, but they were deviating only in the feature work they were doing. They did tons and tons of experimentation, lots of pairing, and they didn't do human code reviews much at all during this time. Emerson, are you raising your eyebrows at that? Yes, definitely. Anyone who's worked in productivity would say that we know code review is really important. But the team wanted to try this experiment, and I said, life is an experiment. Let's go for it. You were burned before. Let's give this a try. I did insist to them that they turn on the AI code reviewer from Graphite, because I think that was enough to catch sort of the silliest issues that would make. And of course, before any product went into the hands of customers, it's critically important that human code review happened. We absolutely did that. We did a really thoughtful code review process before merging this into main. And the team is going to be doing a retro soon because it released today. But I suspect that they will say that this was an effective way to work. It's not what I would have expected, but I'm open to experimentation. And so I embrace it. All right. So now we're already at the conclusion. This has just flown by. So in summary, I want to, this whole talk has been about how startups differ from big tech. And a lot of it is about the culture that you need to build in a startup to support developer productivity. So if there's 4 key takeaways for you, things I want you to remember if you're thinking of going on the startup journey, if you're already on the startup journey, if you're just curious about developer productivity for startups. First off, urgency. You need to instill a sense of urgency in your teams. You need your teams to understand that urgency is the thinking that you need to have. You need to lean into healthy risk-taking in a way that's substantially different from how you would in big tech, where you have a proven company and a proven business. Can't say enough about top-down strategy, top-down roadmap, and really planning centrally in order to achieve the best outcomes. And finally, supporting a culture of experimentation. So I am Rachel Potvin. This is a nicer picture of me than the first one. SVP of Engineering at Sanity and Startup Advisor. So I hope you enjoyed my perspective on how to encourage developer productivity at a startup. And I would love to answer any questions that you have. Yes, I think, Jen, you have a mic, right? Or if you want to shout it, I can repeat the question.
So how do you manage technical debt with this sense of urgency? Right? So let's say you accumulate some technical debt in your first 2 years, and then you realize you start slowing it down. You keep kicking the can down the road and deal with it once you're out of startup phase, or you try to make it sustainable early on?
Yeah. So the question is about technical debt, and how do you balance technical debt if you get a lot of technical debt early in your journey? Do you just keep kicking that can down the road, or do you address it? You have to address it, but you have to do it intentionally. So it's like I was talking about where my team maybe wanted to do a full re-architecture of our sort of indexing. That's just not the right approach. When we approach technical debt, we try to have the same type of goals as we would for any product value. So what's ultimately the goal of this project? What are we trying to get out of it? So it ends up being a balance. Initially, when we did our first top-down roadmap, we focused solely on product goals, and that was fine. And then I said, we'll have a technical roadmap on the side where there's some things about our DevOps experience, how we do deployment, some infrastructure risks that we see, some scaling challenges that we see, and we would sort of merge those in on a team-by-team basis. I've learned over the last year that I want those big tech rocks to be in my main top-down roadmap as well. So we've started intentionally putting things on there so they don't get starved out. There's also other things we do, like every engineer on my team, all my teams have support rotations. And in this support rotation, it's kind of your week to do what you want to do and resolve any frictions that you see. So that week you're not working on 6-week goals or the roadmap, you're entirely working on usually tech debt, customer escalations, et cetera. So we try to give that room to developers to get some of the most annoying frictions solved as well.
Hi, thank you for the talk. What lessons do you think big tech should take back from your experience at startups?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say the stuff I've done to facilitate decision-making is something that big tech could really learn from. If people don't have a clear road in front of them in order to get work done, it's not only unproductive, it's demotivating. And so understand, like a thing you see frequently in bigger tech companies was like, we had a meeting and we didn't actually resolve what the next step is. So let's come back to the meeting next week and try again. Or, oh, we need a meeting to resolve this. Let's look at everyone's calendars. Oh, there's not time until 2 weeks on Tuesday. And so, that's languishing. What structures can you put in place to facilitate decision-making a lot faster? This principal engineer route is one thing I've done. I've also established what I call the engineering council, where when there are tough technical decisions, I have a slot that's reserved for that on a weekly basis where people can come in. It's canceled if there's nothing, but like come in and get these conversations had really quickly and solved quickly. Also really embracing that like one-way and two-way doors and like empowering more people to make decisions that are, not going to be world-ending if they're wrong.
Over here on the other side. So you raised a really interesting question about like tool sprawl, about like CD pipelines, and there's all sorts of mess. I'm really curious, like when did you feel like you hit a threshold where you had to like make a decision? And also very curious how you tackle it. Did you have a team? Did they address this issue to have uniformity? Or did you make a decision and each team decide to figure out how to use that tool? Curious how you tackle it.
I feel like it's a journey and I'm not done yet, right? And so I think it's pretty normal that was one thing that when people ask me what was surprising in a startup, I think we have more vendors than employees because we're just using every tool that's out there. And then our engineers are very, very strong and they're very excited about new tools that come out and they want to adopt them. And I don't want to create a barrier to entry to that. So I wouldn't say I've solved this yet, but we've recognized this as a problem and started to look towards it. Again, I'm kind of leaning on the principal engineers. Some of the results we got from the DX survey also to show the team that, there's a productivity cost to too much sprawl. We've started, working on a much better local dev setup, and it doesn't have to be a principal engineer, but often what will happen is some person does something that is actually really good and makes a lot of sense. And then I have an engineering all staff where we would show that stuff. Like someone did some really great work on observability recently, and I want everyone to take on that same tool stack for observability. So show it to everyone first, get sort of adoption from people who are interested in what they've seen, and then slowly start to say, this is the way we do it. We've also created a repository of engineering patterns that are approved and not approved. So that comes down to like, what programming languages do we use? Sort of like what architecture paradigms do we lean into? And again, we start that with suggestions, and then we have an engineering council where we say, yes, this is what we were going to do going forward. We're never going to stop and be like, let's go fix everything everywhere that doesn't meet this pattern. But at least going forward, we're trying to do that. So I would say it's not an easy solution, but it's something where we're trying to move intentionally there without slowing the rest of the way we work.
Hi, over here on the other side of the room. Big tech, mid-sized companies, startups, everywhere in between. What's the one thing you want us to go back to our companies and fight tooth and nail to make sure we can get implemented to make our lives better?
Oh my goodness, that's a great question. You know, I really believe that there's nothing that makes us happier. You know, I alluded to the fact that I'm on this startup journey, that it's kind of a new life for me, that I was very discouraged and considering walking away from tech. And now I feel very empowered and excited by the progress that I'm making and the sense of accomplishment that I have every day. And I think it's part of the human experience. Every human deserves to have that feeling of moving forward. And so I'm going to lean back on doing decision-making well and clearing the path for your developers so that people have that free road in front of them where they can just go and have that sense of accomplishment that just feels so good. And so I think, you know, that's something that applies across any size company, is figuring out how to unlock that so that people get that joy of being productive and having impact and making progress.
Thank you.
I have a feeling we might be out of time. One last question, great.
It's a small question. I'm just curious, from your personal point of view, that chasm between big tech and startups, is it inevitable? So every startup will one day, if they of course are successful and grow, become a big tech that has all the things that made you walk away from big tech.
Yeah, great question. So first of all, I think it's not inevitable because most startups will not succeed. That's something that you have to know when you go into a startup. There's no magic bullet. There's a lot of different things of like right time, right place, customers. You know, one thing I found really fascinating from a startup perspective is I'm on the core leadership team and I'm exposed to what we're doing in sales, what we're doing in marketing. It's really, really fun to see that, but it is a risky business. My hope is that Sanity does become a big tech company. We, you know, are going well. It's, you know, very likely, and I want to be there for that journey. And I think I will be open to it. I've done it before, but this would be a little bit more on my terms, right? Because I would be there setting the culture and being along the journey along the way, versus the situation I ended up in big tech was there's a lot more things coming down on me that I couldn't control. So my optimistic hope is that, yes, I get to be in big tech again via this job that I have currently now. It'll be a long road, but I hope that I can help control the culture as part of that.
Thank you so much, Rachel. It's been a pleasure getting to hear your talk. Please welcome and thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.